The stage lights were blinding, the cameras rolling, and millions of viewers tuned in worldwide. It wasn't just another talk show episode. This was Oprah Winfrey Live, where global icons came to share their stories. Tonight's guest was none other than Manny Pacquiao, the humble boxing champion from the Philippines who had risen from poverty to become a world legend. Manny entered the stage with his signature shy smile, bowing politely as the audience erupted into cheers. He wasn't wearing flashy jewelry or designer suits, just a simple button-down shirt, dark trousers, and that unmistakable humility in his eyes. Oprah welcomed him warmly at first, highlighting his career achievements: 8-division world champion, a senator, a philanthropist. "Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Manny Pacquiao." The crowd clapped louder. Manny adjusted his seat, his voice calm but steady. "Thank you, Ms. Oprah. I am honored to be here. All that I have, all that I've achieved, is because of God." The word hung in the air. God. For a moment, Oprah smiled politely, but then her expression shifted. She leaned closer, eyebrow raised. "So wait," she said with a chuckle. "You're telling me you believe God actually cares about boxing matches?" The audience laughed lightly at her playful tone, but Manny didn't flinch. He simply nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I believe he guides me. I always pray before I fight." Oprah tilted her head, half amused, half incredulous. "Prayer before a fight, so? Is that your secret weapon? Not training, not discipline, but prayer?" Her voice carried a sarcastic edge, and some in the crowd chuckled again. The camera zoomed in on Manny. His smile softened, but his eyes didn't lose their calm. He placed his hand on his chest. "Training is important. Discipline is important. But without faith, I am nothing." The room grew still. A few in the audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to laugh again or remain quiet. Oprah smirked, expecting Manny to stumble under the weight of her mockery, but he didn't. He sat upright, his presence steady as though unshaken by the attempt to undermine him. Audience hook. What Manny said next turned that laughter into silence and left Oprah completely speechless. The tension in the studio was subtle but unmistakable. Oprah leaned back in her chair, holding her note cards loosely as though she were about to playfully dismantle Manny's simple faith. The cameras captured every smirk, every flicker of amusement in her expression. "So," Oprah continued, her tone half joking, half probing, "when you step into that ring with someone twice your size, are you really thinking God's got this one for me?" A ripple of laughter spread through the audience. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't kind either. Manny remained still, his hands folded neatly in his lap. His lips curved into the faintest of smiles, but his eyes carried a depth of memory that silenced the words he might have spoken immediately. Instead, he took a breath. "When I was a boy in the Philippines," he began softly, "I had nothing. No shoes, sometimes no food. My mother, she prayed with me every night. She told me, 'Manny, God listens even when no one else does.'" The studio grew quieter. A few heads turned toward each other. Manny's voice was not the booming bravado of a fighter. It was the fragile, sincere tone of a man remembering where he came from. He leaned forward slightly. "Before I ever had gloves, before I ever had a trainer, I had prayer. I prayed not to be hungry. I prayed for strength to work. I prayed for my family. And yes, even now, I still pray before I fight, because fighting is not just fists. It is courage. And courage comes from faith." The audience didn't laugh this time. Instead, the camera caught one woman in the front row, her eyes softening, lips pressed together. Oprah chuckled, though the amusement was less convincing now. "That's a beautiful story, Manny, but don't you think maybe it was you? Your hard work? Your discipline? Surely prayer didn't land punches for you." Manny smiled again, shaking his head gently. "Of course, ma'am. I trained every day. I worked hard. But there were many fighters who trained harder, who were stronger. Why me? Why did I rise from the streets to become champion of the world? For me, the answer is faith." The room stirred. Whispers carried from one side of the studio to the other. Some people nodded, others frowned. But nobody was laughing anymore. Oprah pressed on, unwilling to let the moment drift into Manny's favor. She tapped her cards against her knee. "So you really believe God had time to step into a boxing ring? With wars, poverty, and everything else going on in the world?" This time a few in the crowd chuckled again, encouraged by Oprah's wit. The camera zoomed in on Manny's face. He did not flinch, did not frown. Instead, he reached slowly into his pocket. He pulled out a small weathered Bible. Its edges were worn, the cover bent from years of use. He set it gently on the table between them. "When I was a child," Manny said, his voice steady. "This book gave me hope when I had nothing. My mother cried over its pages. I learned discipline, humility, forgiveness from it. Maybe some people laugh, but I carry it always." The camera caught Oprah's expression, a flicker of surprise that quickly turned into a tight smile. "You carry it everywhere?" she asked, almost mocking, but not quite as sure of herself as before. Manny nodded. "It carried me here." Silence fell like a curtain. The audience was locked in. The laughter had drained away. All that remained was a quiet, uneasy tension. Oprah shuffled her cards, buying herself a second. She hadn't expected this soft-spoken man to resist her charm with such calm strength. The viewers at home couldn't look away. Have you ever been mocked for your beliefs? Comment yes below and tell us where you're watching from. The lights overhead burned hot, but the real heat in the studio came from the tension settling in the air. Oprah sat straighter now, her polished smile fixed in place, but her tone sharper, more pointed. She shuffled the cards in her hand as though searching for the perfect question to expose Manny's simplicity. "So Manny," she said, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of a talk show veteran, "you're telling us the Bible and prayer are the reason you became champion? Not science, not coaches, not skill?" The audience chuckled again, some exchanging glances as if to say, "How can he be serious?" Manny's eyes didn't waver. "Faith gave me courage," he answered softly. "Training gave me strength. But faith gave me the reason to never give up." It wasn't the kind of soundbite Oprah wanted. She pressed harder. "But don't you think that's dangerous? To tell people they can just pray their way out of poverty? That's unrealistic." The camera panned across the audience. One man in a suit shook his head, whispering to the woman beside him, "He's too simple-minded. He doesn't understand how the real world works." The woman smirked, nodding in agreement. Another young viewer in the crowd rolled her eyes and muttered, "Boxers should stick to punching, not preaching." Their words didn't reach Manny directly, but the whispers carried through the air like darts aimed at his dignity, and yet he didn't flinch. He sat calmly, one hand resting on his Bible, the other folded neatly in his lap. The laughter and murmurs emboldened Oprah. She leaned forward, tilting her head. "Do you really believe God had time to stop wars, cure disease, and make sure you landed a left hook?" This time the audience laughed louder. The spotlight shifted to Manny and the camera captured his face in close-up. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't defensive, it was peaceful. He bowed his head for a moment, whispering a quiet prayer, his lips moving almost imperceptibly. The audience noticed, and the whispers turned sharper. "Is he praying right now?" a man muttered. "Oh, come on," someone else scoffed. "This is a talk show, not a church." The chuckles rose, bouncing off the walls of the studio. The sound wasn't cruel enough to be called bullying, but it was dismissive, judgmental, the kind of laughter that cuts deeper than open ridicule. Manny lifted his head again, the faint smile returning to his lips. "Prayer," he said gently, "is not about asking God to fight for me. It is about asking for courage, for humility, for the strength to face whatever comes, win or lose." The room quieted slightly, but Oprah wasn't done. "So you're saying every punch, every victory, that wasn't really you? That was divine intervention?" Manny tilted his head, considering his words carefully. "It was both. I worked, I trained, but when the world laughed, when they told me I was too poor, too small, too weak, I prayed. And prayer gave me the courage to keep going." A hush began to fall in parts of the audience. A few nodded, their earlier smirks fading, but others weren't convinced. "Still sounds like blind faith," one man whispered. "Entitlement," a woman murmured. "Thinking God owes him victories." The divide was growing. Half the room stirred with skepticism, while the other half leaned forward, captivated. For Oprah, this was unfamiliar territory. She thrived on having the audience in her corner, guiding them with charm and wit. But now she felt the weight shifting, not completely, but enough to unsettle her rhythm. She crossed her legs, forced another smile, and said, "You know, Manny, some people might say that relying so much on faith is, well, a crutch." The word crutch echoed. The audience shifted uncomfortably. A few gasped softly. It was a bold statement even for Oprah. The camera cut back to Manny. He didn't blink. He didn't frown. He simply rested his hand gently on the Bible in front of him and said, "A crutch helps you walk when you cannot. If my faith is a crutch, then I will walk with it all my life." The silence that followed was heavier than any laughter that had come before. For the first time, Oprah hesitated. She glanced at the audience, expecting their chuckles to back her up. But many faces looked thoughtful now, even conflicted. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Another man leaned forward, nodding slowly. The tide was beginning to turn, though Oprah didn't know it yet. She straightened her notes, masking her discomfort. "All right," she said briskly, "but let's be real here. Hard work, not faith, makes champions." Manny simply smiled. "Faith made me believe hard work was worth it." The crowd murmured again, the whispers now a mix of skepticism and admiration. For the viewers at home, the scene was electric. A legendary talk show host known for her sharp wit seemed to be losing ground against the quiet faith of a humble fighter, and the stage was set for the twist that would change everything. But then, Manny revealed something he had carried with him all along, and suddenly, the entire audience leaned forward in silence. The studio felt different now. The air was heavier, as if everyone sensed that something important was about to happen. Oprah adjusted the stack of cards in her hand, searching for control. But the energy in the room no longer belonged to her. Manny, still calm and steady, kept one hand resting on the small Bible he had placed on the table. Its cover was frayed, its corners bent, pages worn thin from years of turning. The camera zoomed in, capturing the object that suddenly seemed bigger than the show itself. Oprah forced a laugh, trying to lighten the mood. "You really carry that everywhere? Even here on national television?" Manny nodded slowly, his voice soft but firm. "Yes, because this is not just a book. This is my story. My mother prayed over these words when we had nothing to eat. I prayed over these words when I slept on the streets. I prayed over these words when I was told I would never be anything. And I carry it because it reminds me that nothing is impossible." The audience shifted, leaning forward in their seats. The laughter that had echoed minutes ago was gone, replaced by silence thick enough to feel. Oprah crossed her legs, trying to keep her composure. "But Manny," she said carefully, "don't you think people could find that limiting? I mean, you're a global figure admired by millions. Shouldn't you broaden your outlook?" The question was clever, polished, the kind of pivot Oprah had mastered over decades. But Manny didn't take the bait. He lifted the Bible slightly, holding it in his hands. His fingers brushed the worn edges, reverent and sure. "Broadening my outlook?" Manny repeated softly. "This taught me compassion. To forgive even when I am hurt. To stand tall even when I am small. To fight not just in the ring, but for those who cannot fight for themselves. If this is limiting, then I accept those limits." A murmur rippled through the audience. One woman whispered, "Wow." Another man shook his head slowly, conflicted. Oprah tilted her head, a faint crease forming in her forehead. "But do you honestly think, Manny, that God himself had time to step into your fights?" Her words were sharp, her tone skeptical, but her eyes betrayed curiosity now, not mockery. Manny leaned closer to the microphone, his voice steady as stone. "Ma'am, I never prayed for God to make me win. I prayed for the courage to step into the ring. I prayed for the safety of my opponent. I prayed that no matter the outcome, I would honor him. Winning or losing is not in my hands. But faith is always in my heart." The audience froze. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody whispered. The silence was louder than any applause. Oprah blinked, caught off guard. She shifted in her chair, her usual composure slipping ever so slightly. Her lips parted as though to respond, but no words came immediately. The cameras panned across the crowd. Some were visibly emotional, eyes glistening, jaws set in thought. Others crossed their arms defensively, but even they no longer laughed. It was as if Manny had shifted the entire room's energy with a single answer. Finally, Oprah found her voice. "That's very moving, Manny," she said, though the strength in her tone was thinner now. "But don't you think faith is impersonal? Why bring it here to a global stage?" Manny glanced around the studio at the faces watching him, at the cameras broadcasting to millions around the world. His answer was gentle, but his presence filled the room. "Because faith is not about hiding," he said. "It is about living. If I believe but stay silent, then what is my belief worth? I don't share to force anyone. I share because someone out there is struggling, and maybe they need to hear it." The words hit like a wave. The audience, once restless with whispers, was completely still. Even Oprah's polished mask slipped for a second. Her eyes flickered, betraying something she rarely showed on camera: hesitation. The silence stretched. The camera zoomed closer to Manny, his hand still gently resting on the Bible. And then, applause. Not thunderous, not immediate, but scattered claps from the back of the studio. A few people stood, others followed. Soon the room erupted into genuine applause, raw and unprompted. Oprah's eyebrows lifted, her lips pursed in a polite smile, but inside she was rattled. This was her stage, her audience. Yet they were now drawn to Manny, to his unshakable calm, his quiet conviction. Manny bowed his head slightly in gratitude, whispering a prayer under his breath. The applause grew louder. The hidden signal had been revealed. It wasn't just the Bible on the table. It was Manny himself, living proof of the strength faith could give. And the audience could feel it. Oprah glanced down at her notes, but for the first time in the interview, she wasn't in control. The suspense was no longer about whether Manny would stumble under her mockery. It was about what he would say next. And the entire world was watching. But when Manny finally spoke with full strength, his words shook the studio, and Oprah had no comeback. The applause slowly faded, but the energy in the room had shifted for good. Oprah, queen of the stage, leaned back in her chair, masking her unease with a professional smile. But the cameras betrayed her. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. She was used to being in control. Now control belonged to Manny. The world champion sat quietly for a moment, hands folded, Bible resting in his lap. He wasn't flashy. He didn't raise his voice. Yet the silence that followed him was louder than any of Oprah's well-crafted questions. Then he leaned toward the microphone. His voice was calm, but it carried through the studio with an authority that could not be ignored. "Ma'am," Manny began. "When I was a boy, I didn't dream of being famous. I didn't even dream of being a champion. My dream was simple: to have food on the table, to see my family eat one full meal a day. That was my dream." The audience leaned in. Oprah herself tilted her head, listening despite herself. "I sold bread on the streets. I slept on cardboard boxes. Sometimes I fought in the ring for only a few pesos, just enough to buy rice. People looked at me and said, 'You'll never be anything. You're too small, too poor, too weak.'" He paused, his eyes glancing briefly at the crowd. "And maybe they were right. By myself, I was nothing, but every night I prayed. I asked God not to make me rich, not to make me powerful. I asked him to give me a chance to fight, a chance to prove that my life could mean something." The silence was profound. Even the crew members backstage seemed frozen, listening. Manny lifted his Bible again, turning it slowly in his hands. "And every time I felt like giving up, I remembered what my mother told me. 'Son, we are poor, but we are not forgotten. Pray and God will hear you.' That faith gave me strength. That faith carried me here, not fame, not money. Faith." A soft murmur rippled through the audience. No laughter this time, no scoffs. Just reflection. Oprah cleared her throat, trying to steer back into safer waters. "That's very powerful, Manny. But you do understand not everyone has your faith. Don't you think relying too much on it could alienate people?" Manny turned to her with a gentle smile. "Ma'am, faith is not about alienating. It's about including. It teaches me to respect every person, no matter what they believe. I fight for respect. I live for respect. If people don't share my faith, that's okay. But I will always share my story." The crowd broke into applause again, louder this time. Even Oprah was forced to pause, waiting for it to die down. Then Manny's tone shifted, firmer now, more commanding. "But I must say this with all respect. Too often the world mocks people of faith. They think we are weak or simple or foolish. But what is more foolish, to believe in hope or to believe in nothing? To have courage through faith, or to laugh at those who find strength in prayer?" His words landed like blows in the ring. Each sentence sharp, undeniable. The audience erupted in cheers, clapping, even shouting. Oprah blinked, momentarily stunned. Manny continued, his voice rising with conviction. "I will never be ashamed of my faith, because when I had nothing, it was all I had. And now that I have everything the world can offer, faith is still the only thing I cannot live without." The standing ovation began, slow at first, then spreading across the studio. People were on their feet, clapping, whistling, cheering. Some had tears in their eyes. Oprah sat frozen, her lips parted slightly. She glanced at her cue cards, but they seemed useless now. The narrative had escaped her grasp. Manny bowed his head humbly, whispering another prayer. When the applause finally settled, he lifted his eyes and spoke once more, softer but no less powerful. Success, fame, money. These things can be taken away. But faith? Faith stays. That is why I share it. Not to argue, not to boast, but to remind anyone watching that no matter where you are, no matter how broken you feel, you are never alone. The studio was silent again, but this time it was a reverent silence. Not judgment, not mockery, and respect. For the first time in the interview, Oprah didn't have a comeback. She smiled, but it was small, almost humbled. "Manny, I wasn't expecting that," she admitted. Manny smiled back, gentle and warm. "Neither was I, ma'am. But God always knows what to say." The audience laughed softly, not at him, but with him. And at that moment, the balance of power had shifted completely. Oprah, the master interviewer, had been left speechless on her own stage. But the true turning point came when someone else stepped forward, and the entire studio witnessed justice in action. The studio lights seemed softer now, though they hadn't changed. What had shifted was the atmosphere itself. The audience, once smirking and whispering, now sat in quiet awe of Manny Pacquiao. He wasn't just the boxing champion anymore. He was something far greater. A man of unshakable conviction who had just turned the tables on one of the most powerful hosts in television history. Oprah tried to recover, clearing her throat and sitting upright. Her trademark charisma hadn't disappeared, but it was dimmed, weighed down by the tide of respect flowing toward Manny. For perhaps the first time in her career, she realized she had underestimated a guest. "Well, Manny," she said with a nervous laugh, "you certainly have the audience on your side tonight." The camera cut to the audience. They weren't smiling politely. They were nodding, clapping, and some even wiping tears from their eyes. One woman shouted from the back, "That's real strength, Manny." The crowd erupted in agreement. Oprah pressed on, trying to salvage her authority. "But you know, Manny, in this world of science and progress, many believe faith is outdated. Don't you think that message might hold people back?" It was a calculated move and an attempt to shift the crowd again. But this time the audience didn't nod with her. Instead, a man in the front row stood up. "With respect, Ms. Winfrey," he said boldly, his voice carrying through the studio. Faith didn't hold him back. Look where it brought him. Maybe what's outdated is mocking someone for what gives them hope. Gasps filled the room. The audience clapped again, louder this time, backing the man's words. Oprah's smile froze. She wasn't used to being challenged by her own audience. Manny, ever humble, raised his hand to quiet the applause. "Please," he said softly. "I don't want this to be about attacking anyone. Ms. Oprah has done much good in this world. I only want to remind people that faith is not weakness, it is strength." His humility only deepened the audience's respect. The applause swelled again, not just for his words, but for his grace and victory. Oprah's face tightened slightly. She wasn't the villain, not really, but in this moment her dismissive tone and mockery had made her appear that way. And now in front of millions she was facing the consequences. The camera zoomed in on her as she adjusted her cards nervously. "Well," she said slowly, "I must admit, Manny, I may have underestimated the depth of your convictions." The crowd cheered at her acknowledgement, sensing the shift. Manny smiled gently, nodding. "Convictions are not mine alone. They belong to anyone who dares to believe even when the world laughs." The studio exploded in applause again. Some people even stood up. The cameraman struggled to capture the scene. The standing ovation wasn't just for Manny's words, but for his unshakable dignity. And in that moment, the punishment for Oprah wasn't humiliation. It was silence. She, the legendary talk show titan, had no witty comeback, no clever line, no dramatic pivot. For the first time, her greatest tool, her voice, failed her. The audience had already chosen their side. And it wasn't hers. The justice wasn't loud or cruel. It was simple, undeniable. The balance of power had shifted, and it was permanent. Oprah exhaled slowly, finally managing a smile. But it was different now. Less polished, more human. "Well, Manny," she said softly, "I guess I'm the one who learned something tonight." The crowd roared with approval. Manny didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't bask in the victory. He bowed his head slightly, pressing the Bible to his chest. "We all keep learning," he said gently. "That's why we are here." The ovation reached its peak. Viewers at home could feel it. The catharsis, the justice, the satisfaction of seeing someone mocked for their beliefs turn the tables with nothing but grace and truth. Backstage, even the crew was emotional. Camera operators whispered to each other, shaking their heads in awe. "I've never seen anything like this," one said. Another added, "Oprah's never been speechless before." And yet here she was. Justice had been served, not with cruelty or revenge, but with dignity. Manny Pacquiao hadn't just defended his faith. He had defended the dignity of every person watching who had ever been mocked, dismissed or belittled for what they believed. The punishment was complete. Oprah's authority on that stage had cracked, and Manny's quiet strength had filled the void. But Manny didn't stop there. His final words gave everyone, Oprah, the audience, and millions watching at home, a lesson they would never forget. The studio was still buzzing from the standing ovation, but Manny Pacquiao sat quietly, his Bible still resting on his lap, his eyes lowered in humility. He hadn't come to win an argument or conquer a stage, yet somehow he had done both, without throwing a single punch. Oprah leaned forward, her tone gentler now, stripped of its earlier sharpness. "Manny," she said softly, "I have to admit, you've surprised me tonight. I thought I was inviting a boxing legend, but what I've seen is something more, a man of faith, a man of principle. And I can't argue with that." The audience applauded again, but it wasn't just noise. It was warmth, genuine and heartfelt. Manny gave a small nod, his voice calm. "Thank you, ma'am. I respect you. I respect this platform, and I respect everyone here, whether they believe what I believe or not. My message is simple. Never be ashamed of who you are or of the faith that gives you strength." The cameras zoomed in, capturing the raw honesty in his face. This wasn't a rehearsed line. This was Manny's truth, delivered with the same conviction he carried into the ring. He glanced at the audience, his gaze sweeping across the room. "When I was a boy, people laughed at me. They called me small. They said I had nothing, but faith told me I had everything I needed. And that's the message I want to leave tonight. Not about boxing, not about winning, but about hope. Because someone out there is struggling right now and they need to hear this. You are not forgotten. Keep your faith. Keep your fight." The room was silent. Some audience members wiped away tears. Others clutched their hands together, visibly moved. Even Oprah, usually the one steering emotions, now found herself swept in Manny's current. She leaned closer, her voice lower, almost intimate. "Manny, I've interviewed presidents, billionaires, artists, thinkers, but tonight, I think you've given one of the most powerful answers I've ever heard." The crowd erupted one final time, the cheers rising to the rafters. Manny smiled humbly, bowing his head. "It is not me, ma'am. It is the one who gave me strength." The closing credits began to roll, the cameras capturing Oprah and Manny shaking hands. But the energy in the room was unforgettable. For once, it wasn't about ratings or sound bites or celebrity gossip. It was about something deeper, a reminder of the power of faith, humility and courage in the face of mockery. And as the lights dimmed, the audience rose again, clapping not just for a champion, but for a man who had just reminded the world that dignity doesn't come from applause. It comes from standing firm in your truth. That night, millions who watched at home felt the message resonate. Manny Pacquiao hadn't humiliated Oprah. He hadn't argued or raised his voice. He had done something far greater. He had stood tall, unshaken, and used kindness as his shield. The moral was clear. Silent doesn't mean weak. Humble doesn't mean powerless. And faith, no matter how much it is mocked, can move the strongest hearts. And as the credits rolled, a final question lingered for the viewers everywhere. Have you ever been mocked for your beliefs? Tell us your story in the comments. And if you believe in standing strong, type faith below.